Sorry. So we're a wee bit delayed, so I will make sure I don't miss out on any of the important points and I'll just get a bit started today. So thank you for inviting me along. My name is Julie Langford. I live in a city called Edinburgh in Scotland. Some of you might have had the chance to see that place. If not, maybe one day you can visit. And I'm going to talk about my experiences of being a coach working with executive leaders or leaders who are trying to move into that executive space, and why that can be quite a particularly tricky time for leaders, and why coaching can be hugely influential in helping people make that transition. So in terms of what I'll cover today, it's a bit of an introduction to myself. I've predominantly worked in financial services actually for most of my career, and I've been there for about 30 years. I have subsequently become an independent coach and work on my own. But a lot of the experiences that I've had working with senior leaders, working on team development, executive development, I'm trained as a mentor, an executive coach, and a team coach. You start to build up quite an understanding of what the different levels of leadership mean for people, and why transitioning into particularly senior roles can be so demanding for leaders, and why coaching in particular can be really, really helpful. So I'm going to weave some of that into all the aspects that I talk about today. Now, I know you may well have some questions, but I will leave time at the end for those, and maybe even to gather some insight that you might have as coaches or interested parties in this topic, which would be fantastic. So we are going to talk about understanding the transition that these leaders go through. What are the challenges and the opportunities in moving to executive role? Actually, there's some real subtlety attached to an executive role that's not always that obvious. And so those challenges and opportunities that perhaps they haven't faced into start to rise up at this point. There can also be slightly different expectations of them at this level. They may have thought that some of the things that they had were strengths may not look like strengths anymore. So we also need to start to understand what is being asked of them now that is different. So what can get in the way and how can coaching help? Well, I could probably spend a day talking about this, but we don't have a day. So I'm going to share with you my key insights and experiences that I have gained in my working life. They may be different to you, but I'm just sharing some of the experiences I've got. So the things that can really get in the way for this level of transition, and the way that coaching can help people, is by really helping them understand their strengths and weaknesses. And when I talk about strengths and weaknesses, I sometimes refer to them as things that make somebody feel stronger and things that they do that can make them feel weaker. It may not always be as obvious, because you could end up doing something that you actually find quite draining, but might be seen as one of your strengths. And that begins to play into your energy levels and how much resourcefulness you've got for the transition. I'll look at sort of coaching techniques and benefits of them. I'll give you some examples of different styles I've used, how I identify key skills and competencies for leaders in this area, some of the techniques and approaches that I've used when leaders have got stuck, which can be quite common, and a case study of when things didn't work out quite as well as we planned, and things that have worked well, and then obviously a chance for you to ask me some questions. So let me continue and we can get started. So who are we talking about? Who is involved from this transitional point of view? This is not an exhaustive list, okay? I'm sure you could add things to this list. And these are things from my own experience and from the work that I've done to date. So they are coming from a personal perspective. The other thing I would also say is that every transition is different. It depends on the working environment somebody's working in, the business they're working in, the culture they're working in. So this list probably ends up looking a little bit simplistic, than probably maybe ought to be. But hopefully it gives us a shape for the things we're going to talk about today. So who's involved? So we're looking at leaders who are either just about to move up into a C-suite role. So this is at executive level. So this might not be the top leadership team with the CEO, but the level below that. So really shifting into a very, very senior position. These may be people who are on transition plans, on a talent program, on a succession plan. They may also be people who've literally just moved into that job and they're now needing some help to transition fully into doing that all the time. And we will talk a little bit about the difference between that happening for an internal person being promoted into that role and for somebody who's external coming into the organization. So that's kind of who we're looking at and who's involved. Now, what I would say is that for some of these leaders, sometimes they are uncertain of whether they really want to get that position in the future. And sometimes the coaching can be a really useful way to help them understand what might be being asked of them. Because what's being asked at that level is sometimes subtly quite different and can be quite difficult. So that leads me into the challenges and the opportunities. So the challenges that face leaders at this sort of level, there are quite a few. Some of them can rely on the need for them to gain some new understandings or experiences. So that might mean they've got to work in different places. But sometimes it can get them to sort of let go of maybe some of the skills and attributes that they felt have got them to this point. So sometimes they might get feedback at this point that says, oh, we'd just like you to be a bit more commercial, or we'd like you to have a bit better of a strategic view on things. And they may be thinking, well, I don't know what that means. They might also be being told that some of the skills that had got them to this point maybe are not so valuable now. Perhaps they've been a leader who's been really good at building coalitions, at making great relationships, at bringing people together, maybe because they've been a bit compliant, but that's enabled those relationships to grow. They might now be being told, you need to be a bit more forceful, you need to be a bit more direct. So they're starting to wonder where they sit in all of this. And obviously, opportunities that arise for them is the chance for them to do something at a really senior level. This is a chance for them to start to make changes, perhaps to the organization's long life and the legacy they may leave behind. So some of the questions I'll ask leaders at this stage is, how will this organization have been the better for having you here? What do you contribute that is unique to you? And, pretty much every single leader that does get to a level where they're able to transition have something unique. They have something that that organization really likes about them. Even if they're not quite sure what it is, there's usually something there. So there's some real challenges and opportunities. The thing that's also important to note is often at this level, they've not had an awful lot of feedback to tell them what those things are. And now they might suddenly get a wave of data through assessments or feedback that they're maybe not used to. And we'll come on to that in a little bit. So now let's have a look at sort of internal execs versus external execs. And I have quite a bit of experience in this because during COVID, I was the head of the executive coaching for the C-suite population who were coming in. We had candidates who were applying for jobs as executives who were often being headhunted, and they were joining the organization in the middle of COVID, and they didn't know anybody. And so I supported them through that transition. And what it brought home to me is some of the real subtle differences between being an internal candidate and moving into a C-suite role and the transition of that, and being an external candidate and moving into that transition, or actually moving straight into that job. So we take the internal as an example to start with. So some of the downsides is that you leave perceptions around the organization. So even if you've left some of those behaviors behind, people will remember how you behaved in previous roles, and that can sometimes work in your favor or not. For internal candidates, they may actually have been successful, which is great, and in this new role, but they may now be the boss of the people that actually had applied for that. So they may have some of the unsuccessful candidates in their teams. And they may have felt that over the last few months or even a year, they've kind of been, in a job interview for a period of time, and that will have taken its toll. So there are some real challenges with that. However, they do have a good internal network that they can use, and they can build on that and help them in their new roles and experiences. For the external candidate, they don't have any of that baggage, if you like, of perception, which is great. But what they also don't have is they don't have perhaps that loyal sponsorship group that the internal candidate has. They don't have the network that the internal candidate has. And they need to create those really quickly. And they need to be able to make good impressions quickly. And they need to be able to sort of demonstrate their worth. Now, parts of the transition are the same. They could well be in a new team. They could well be in a new department. They could be getting a whole new set of experiences. They could be asked to build a new skill set. So some of that transition is similar, but don't believe it's exactly the same, because there's subtleties between those two scenarios that really, as a coach, you need to pay attention to. Sometimes for the external candidate, you will really need to help them build those networks. Excuse me. And for the internal candidates, allow them to shake off maybe some of the baggage that they're carrying into this new role. And they may have to demonstrate that to stakeholders and key players that they have moved on and they have shifted. So there is really a subtle difference between the two of those. So what might be some of the pitfalls to watch out for? Well, as I've sort of described, at this level, suddenly you're at a slightly different place. Quite often you will have a new leader that you're reporting to, somebody who's very senior in the organization. And sometimes that means that you get even less support, you get less feedback. You might find you're in a position where you don't have the networks that you once have. You can start to feel that some of the skill sets you've used before that have got you to the roles you've had before aren't quite working in the same way. And actually, this can really knock the confidence of a very senior leader at this transition point. And I've worked with a number of leaders who have really wanted to move up to that executive level, but suddenly feel quite lonely. Suddenly, the peer group is more competitive. Suddenly, the senior leadership population are paying a bit more attention. Suddenly, they're having to present at board meetings when they may never have had to do that before. And the expectation is that they can do all of it. They can do all of that now, when that just might not be the case for good reason. One of the things I want to share with you is when I was doing the work in NatWest Group, one of the things that we did was we supported leaders for a 10-month period. Now, the reason the 10-month period was so important is there's been quite a lot of research to prove that when somebody starts a new executive role in particular, that actually after that 6-month period, they can start to have a real wobble. Perhaps some of the things they've implemented haven't worked as well. Sometimes they're actually beginning to wonder whether they've made the right decision. And so keeping them going right the way through for 10 months allowed us to support them for that longer period of time. So there's something quite important in the length of time that you provide the support for through coaching. Okay. In terms of clear direction and consensus, one of the things that can be incredibly helpful at this stage is to enable people to understand what is it they need to develop. And one of the things that can be incredibly helpful for that is actually gathering data, perhaps feedback, it might be 360 data, it might be some assessments, as we look to identify those leaders that are able to move up to that level. And that direction, and then that being shared with their manager, perhaps with the head of HR, perhaps with key stakeholders who will make the decision on their future development, is really important. Too many times I've had leaders tell me that the only feedback they've been given is a one-line statement. You don't have a great brand. You need to improve your impact. It's almost impossible to do work based on something that's so light. So getting that consensus and direction is important. And that brings me on to the data. And it needs to be beyond just statements like you need to improve your brand or you need to be a bit more commercial. What is it that's really holding them back? When people view them as being potentially the next CEO, why do they go, no, I'm not sure? Why do they think, oh, that person's got the potential? What is it that tells them that they could be successful? And that insight that's so important needs to play a big part in those coaching goals, in the work that you then do in the coaching, because that's the nub of what you want to work out. The other thing that's really important is making them remember all the skills that they have got them here, their unique contributions, that things that make them specifically good at what they do, because those are the places that you can really use your leverage and can use the coaching to help them deal with some of the things they might want to change or be a bit different in the future. And then we think about progress tracking. So how are you doing? One of the things I'll often say to leaders, especially if they're talking about presenting, and we'll say, oh, I've done a town hall and I've laid out all these things that we want to do, and nobody seems to know what I'm talking about. Nobody seems to remember. You sometimes need some new ways of tracking, okay? Don't just ask people, have you been to my presentation? What you need to do is ask people who attended, what were the 3 messages you think I was trying to give you? If you get a range of different answers, you need to think about how you set those messages up. If you get the same answers, you're probably doing the right thing. So you need to start helping that leader be a bit creative in really understanding how they're doing. How often do they get to see the stakeholders that will make a decision on their careers? Do they get any opportunity? What's getting in the way? How do they know how they're doing? Can they self-reflect? Can they actually work out what worked well in a meeting or in an event or in the last quarter? What do their teams think of them? How much do they respond to their instigation and drive and momentum? What happens when they're not there? So you're starting to really try to get to a different level of experience of understanding how that person's doing. And then that leads me on to who should be involved in this transition. Well, obviously, the leader needs to be involved, but also their manager, and most likely, perhaps an HR, head of talent, the person that is in those meetings and conversations when their names get mentioned for future roles. And if there is a coach involved in that transition, a coach should be involved in some of those discussions that prepare for being able to start that coaching goal setting and planning what the job of that coaching is going to be. Okay, so quite a lot in there. And as I say, not an exhaustive list, but the things that I've come to understand. Okay, so why even bother with coaching? How can it help? Well, the first thing I'd say is working on yourself is really hard. How many of you most nights when you watch the television, Netflix, whatever, go to the same seat, the same place in the city, the same room in the house every single night? And actually, if you were told you couldn't do that and you had to go somewhere else, you'd actually find that quite hard. So although we have perhaps good ideas of what we want to do differently and how we want to behave, working on yourself is really hard. And you don't always see the things that are going on. You will have your blind spots. That's really, really important to remember. And a good coach helps and guides you on that journey. The other thing that's really important is reflecting and learning from that reflection, not just reflecting and giving yourself a really hard time. We might reflect and go, oh, that meeting was really bad, or I didn't land that well, or that conversation didn't go well. And you can get into a sort of a cycle of thinking that wasn't any good. In coaching, that reflection can be seen as insight data. Get curious. What's the learning here? What are you not paying attention to? What if it had been easier? What would you have noticed? So coaching allows you to help that leader really get to grips with what's going on and how best to take that learning forward. And the other thing about coaching is it's really, really hard to do this level of self-reflection on your own when you're already in a very, very demanding and time-poor role, which many of these leaders face into. So they're often incredibly busy, perhaps doing lots of travel, making lots of connections with people all of the time. Just physically getting them to move out of that mindset can be really, really hard. And that's when coaching can really help. I'd like to share with you just a very brief story about what a client said to me this week, just finishing the transition coaching with her. And she said, although the coaching gave me real insight, the thing that really, really helped me was understanding why I behave the way I am. And that's when the coaching really made a difference. So it's very much something that can get underneath the surface. It's not just a tactical change. We start to help people rewire some of the things that they're doing, which can make those changes much more long lasting. Okay, so what can get in the way for these leaders and how can coaching help with that? Well, some of the techniques that they're using just might not work now. The way they think about the impact they're having might need to be different. Their beliefs and ways of working might be getting in their way. And the reason you'll know this, is that they may keep saying, oh yeah, I've had feedback about that, but I can never seem to do anything about it. Yeah, I know I keep wanting to change that, but when I put my mind to it, I do it for a couple of weeks, but then I just revert back to type when I'm stressed. There may be well-worn behaviors or techniques that actually they find really, really difficult to shift. And I will talk in a minute a little bit about how you can shift those. But these are the kind of the stuck bits, the bits that are in their way that coaching can help start to shift and move for them to give them more access to their resources and their capability. Because remember, coaching is about changing the way you're operating so it's easier, it's more effective, it's more successful, and has a forward motion. So it needs to be making a difference. So that's something that becomes really important. Okay, let's move on to some coaching techniques. So I'm hoping when we get a chance to have a chat towards the end of this, I might get to hear some other techniques that you use that are really helpful, or you might ask me some questions about these. My overall style is person-centered, which pretty much aligns to lots of coaching. So it's really focused on the person and not the problem. And this becomes very important at an executive level because it's very likely these leaders will go on to work in different organizations. So you kind of need to be organization agnostic, if you like. And therefore, it really does heighten the importance of working on the person and not the problem. And some of the things I do to help me do that is get the person to think about the skills and the attributes that they already have. What are the things that make them enjoy the work that they do? I often give clients a bit of an activity to do before they even meet with me. And that is to sort of record two things. Record the things that give them energy. What are the activities that they do day to day that give them energy? Maybe they've spent all day on them, but they still feel buzzed at the end of it. And what are the things that they do that actually drain them? Just takes the lifeblood out of them, really tires them. Because these are going to be clues into how much they spend time on these things, how much energy they have in the day to keep up the momentum of these types of jobs comes down to how much energy they're using. and how much energy they might be wasting. So getting them to start to understand how they're operating and what the impact of that is really, really important. Really great starting point. The next thing, which is probably the most important, is how open are they to change? How much do they want this? It's not easy working on yourself. It's not easy working on change. If you really, really don't want it and you've just been asked to go along to some coaching, it's probably not going to work that well. So ask them, why is this really important to you? Why now? Why does it matter that you do this? What's going to make the difference? In 3 years' time, what do you want to feel like? Why does that matter? What is their driver? And are they open to changing? That's probably the most fundamental thing. Interestingly, that's something I learned many, many years ago in a completely different discipline, but I've probably used most in my time. And then you can also really help them learn from previous experiences. And I'll come on to talk about a timeline in a moment. But they will have had many, many experiences that they will have forgotten about that tell them they are capable, that tell them they have resources, that tell them that they can do these difficult things, and that tell them that they're strong and capable. One of the most valuable things I see happening through coaching is somebody gaining their confidence again, feeling that little bit bigger, knowing they've got the resources, feeling that bit stronger inside. And learning from your previous experiences has a wealth of advantage to it. It tells them they can do it. It gives them an immediate set of resources they can go to. And it helps them shape how they want to operate in the future. Because by having a past experience, you can decide whether you want to keep it in exactly the same way, or you might want to tweak those experiences and change them for the future. So using previous experiences are really, really valuable. Okay, so there's a whole lot of techniques that you can use in coaching. I'm sure you all try these on a numerous number of cases. But there's a couple of things that I particularly like using. Now, the reason I tend to go to creative techniques is senior leaders are often very bright, very articulate, and very, very good at pulling together a beautifully constructed sentence with all the things they think they need to focus on. But it kind of gets in the way of the work and they can start spinning and get caught in this sort of babble of language and wordsmithing a feeling or a situation. So sometimes you want to break that and get them into what's really going on. So I use something called timelines, which I learned when I was doing some NLP training a number of years ago. And that's really asking somebody to think about a past experience and creating a physical timeline in a room. Or even you can do this remotely, but in a room works well, where you have the future, you have the present, and you have the past. And you use the timeline to get people to go back to a moment that was resourceful and even get them walk up to today and the future, bringing those resources with them. It's actually a technique that's used a lot in sport, but it allows somebody to just start to access some of that latent potential that they just had forgotten about. And more often than not, as they move into that future place on the timeline, they start to begin to feel a little different. And I can answer some questions about that when we come to the Q&A, but I would ask you to look at that. Time work can be really valuable to help them shifting out of their current headspace, which can happen. The other thing I love doing is getting them to think about images and objects. So I was working with a client a number of years ago, and she was really, really keen to feel much more assertive and capable in a really, really stressful meeting. And we talked about all the things that she could do for about 20 minutes, and nothing was shifting. And she was sitting at home, and I was sitting in my office. And I said to her, go and find something in your house that just symbolizes that feeling of confidence and capability you want in that meeting. So she went away. She was away for a couple of minutes, and she came back with a bottle of her favorite perfume. And she said, "This stuff makes me feel great." I said, "Okay, so what would you do then?" So she said, "I'm going to spray this on just before I go into that meeting." And she said, "I just know this is exactly how I want to feel." Now, who would have thought the use of perfume would come into a coaching technique? But it's about giving the person some space and creativity to find the solution that works for them. Okay, it could have been anything. Images are also good if somebody's stuck. So what I sometimes do is share image cards. What is it that you're feeling at the moment? What could a picture demonstrate that better? Could you now choose a picture of the thing you really want? What's that emotion you really want to have? And it allows you just to start to shift things. Quite often, when you're working with leaders who've been doing their job for a while, they are now a bit stuck at times. And it's that stuckness that a coach requires to have some creative input around, because perhaps other techniques just haven't worked in the past. And the final one is really about getting underneath the surface and understanding what those beliefs are. Our beliefs drive everything that we do. And often behaviors are embedded because unhelpful beliefs have started to take hold. I'm not good at presenting, or I clam up in a senior meeting. Okay, you might have had those experiences, but what might be a more helpful way to look at it? And something called the iceberg coaching technique, which you can look up, has a really lovely process through to help somebody really come up and back through those thoughts and ideas in a more helpful way. So I'm a little conscious of time, so I'm just going to move on to the next slide so we do have some time at the end. So I guess in summary, let me give you the sort of insights. It's really important to work on the person. Senior leaders will be a bit blind to the things that maybe they actually have got that are quite unique, and you need to bring that into light for them. It's really helpful to have data and have a connected support group for that leader to help them through the journey. Is their manager supporting them? Is the HR director supporting them? Encourage the leader to see the things they do well, compliment them, build back some of that confidence they might have lost. And always remember that some of the more subtle changes that that leader needs to make may not be the easy things for them to do. And understanding the context within all of that is really, really important. Coaching can massively help. It's really hard for leaders to get the time to do that level of reflection. But with a formal coaching contract, it legitimizes that time to pause and reflect. It legitimizes that desire for them to grow and try things out. And that can be incredibly freeing for a leader and generate beautiful growth. I mean, that's the reason I do this, is I see that level of growth, which is just so lovely. And let me share with you a case study when a good idea turns bad, but did end up working out in the end. So one of the things that had been tried in our executive talent program was to take a leader who was very successful in one division and move them to another division and give them a breadth of experience they haven't had before, that sets them on a path for a very senior role, but actually gives them a chance to get their hands dirty and do something different. So one leader was placed in this position with no support, with some responsibilities to his previous job, and in a very, very, very difficult time for that new division's work. He massively struggled. And so we were starting to see somebody go from hero to zero in the space of a few months. And thankfully, I was then due to come and help him and coach him so he would have a bit of support. He was almost broken, because he'd suddenly forgotten all of the skills that he possessed in his previous role. With the right level of tweaking, he could actually apply to this new role. He didn't have to know everything. He didn't have to be over everything. He couldn't use some of those skill sets that he had before, but he could use his intellect and his capability and his ability to rise above the problem and solve the issues that were at hand. So through the 10-month coaching period, we really enabled him to stop, reflect, understand what he was learning, and start to play in this space slightly differently. He'd reverted completely to a stress state of needing to know everything, which was just turning him into knots. So even in that difficult situation, just having that pause, that reflection, enabled him to get a bit of a level footing. And actually, it forced him to take some action to really challenge back some of the things that he was being asked to do and why he needed some extra support to do that. And as a result of those experiences, he actually went on to get this very senior position that he was looking for. So coaching can sometimes be that step in part that can really save leaders from things that they really struggle with. It can be used to give them that support and that guidance when they so very need it. Okay, well, I'm really conscious of time, so I'm pretty much at the end now. So I just want to check. Yes, I've come to the end. So I think I might stop sharing now, so you don't have me in the background, and pass to Tansika to see if there's any questions or comments or thoughts, or if there's anybody there even. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, Adam.
I'm so sorry. I think everyone is there. That's been such an insightful learning, especially about imposter syndrome and everything. I can request if anyone to unmute themselves or react if you want me to unmute you, and if you have any questions. Mm, I had a question from Priyal on our thing. Let me ask her. Does anyone have any questions?
I see Vishal, I think, trying to connect to audio, so I don't know whether there's maybe something you need to pop into chat. You can do that if you like.
Sorry.
There was somebody trying to connect to their audio, and I wondered if they were trying to make ask a question. They obviously could pop it into chat if that was
I
easy.
think they're trying to ask a question. One sec. I had Priyal raise her hand to ask a question.
Oh, here we go.
Mm.
Let me just read this. So it says, hi, Julie, you talked about how feedback at the executive level can be vague. What are some ways leaders can get clearer and more actionable insights? Lovely, lovely question. Thank you so much, Piral, for that. Prial. So one of the things that worked really well when I was working in financial services was we would do an assessment process for those leaders. So it enabled them to have a bit of an interview, gather some data on them, and actually get a bit of an overview of their skills and their development areas. And that used to be the way we would base the coaching. If that's not available, if you were coaching somebody at that level, I would encourage them to get some of that feedback. And I've sometimes, as the coach, gone out independently to perhaps some of their stakeholders or their peer group and asked for some specific feedback that I would get back and share with the leader. So the essence of this really is that they can get something that they can work on. It might also be important for them to go back to their leader and say, look, I just need a bit more data here. What is it that what would you see me doing that would tell you that I'm actually doing this well? So that can actually be a way of helping that. I hope that's answered your question. You can give me a thumbs up as an emoji if that's helpful. But if you've anything further, let me know. Let me see. We've got another one coming in. Let me just see what that says. 1 second. Okay. Oh, right. She had a bad network zone, but I wanted to ask how leaders reconnect with their strengths, especially when they're doubting themselves in a new role. Oh gosh, that's so common. One of the things that I find actually quite sad is leaders who've worked really hard and are really a bit tired at this point actually get this job they've wanted forever and actually suddenly feel a bit underconfident about it because they've just not had an awful lot of positive feedback. So what I do is I get them to look at those things that they do really well. So I get them to think about, what do you love about your job? What really makes you tick? What really gets you excited? What's the best feedback you've ever had? And try and bring alive for them the things that they are good at, because they are good at it. And the other thing I say to them is, you didn't get this job by winning a lottery ticket. You got this job because you're good. You got this far because you're good. You got this far because they see potential in you. So it's sometimes reminding them that those strengths are there. They lose sight of them quite quickly, though. So that's why coaching can really help them. Love that question. Such a good one. Now, there's something else has come in. I'll just see what that one is. You mentioned iceberg coaching. What's a belief shift you've seen? Oh, wow. Right. Okay. So I had something happen quite recently, actually, and we were looking at very capable, but really needed to feel that she was really in control of stuff at work. It then transpired that as we started to go through the coaching iceberg model, that actually this is something that she has across all her life. And actually, she's finding it really, really tiring to try and control everything. And so as we got to the belief around, I need to control everything, she was able to go, but I don't want to feel like that. I actually want to feel different. Okay, so what would be more useful? Well, I want to understand the bits I can control and the bits I can't. That would be a helpful thing. So that was a massive shift, and that started to really unlock things. So we had this option. Is that something you want to control? I'm like, oh God, yeah. Don't think I need to control that. I'll let them just go off and do it. So that's such a lovely question. So valuable. It's a great tool if you can use it. Really good tool. Any more questions from anybody?
Oh, okay.
Conscious we're getting a wee bit close to
Yeah,
the clock anyway.
your last question is here. Okay, guys, I'm sorry, but this has to be the last question. Julie's really busy. Hmm. Okay, Shijan has sent it to me by mistake. He said that I can just send it on the group. Sweet of him to say that. He's asked if there's one mindset shift change that could be make a difference for a leader in the transition. What would it be, professionally looking?
Yeah. So I think one, and I meant to say this and I forgot. So thank you for the question. Get curious. See what you're doing through a really curious lens. It takes all the heat out of whether I did it right, wrong, I'm a bad person. Get curious. And the other thing that I get them to try and think about is, how will this organization be better for having had you in it? It gets them to think very differently about their day-to-day activities. So if you're here for 4 years as an executive leader and then 10 years pass, what will people say about the contribution you had made? How did you shift the culture? How did you shift the meaning of the organization? Does that matter to you? And suddenly that brings them into this place of, this is actually where I can start to play. And that's really what's being asked of leaders at that level, actually. That is what's being asked of them. It's not just about delivering against their measures, it's about the contribution that they're making. So hopefully that helps answer some of the questions.
Perfect. Julie, thank you so much. This was super insightful, and I think everyone had a great learning and an experience from this. I'm sure people will have more questions. What I'm going to do is going to read out them to you
Yeah.
in
Yeah,
person.
that's fine. And I'm so sorry there was a delay at the start and I was faffing around with the stuff. So apologies to that. But I've been very happy to come and speak today and happy to do anything follow-on sessions if that would be helpful. And a shame I didn't get to hear so many of the questions, but maybe I can do next time.
Okay, that to be part of the session. Oh, thank you. Perfect.
And can you send me the recording?
Yes, I shall. I shall send you the recording. I will request you to stay on call. Everyone else can leave the call if needed. Nicole can say bye to Julie.
Bye. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Joining.
Like, it's okay.
Oh, I didn't quite catch that. That's a shame.
Okay, I'm gonna connect with you on Gmeet right now. Okay?
Okay, that's fine.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Bye. I will end this.